Imagine this. You are about to go through one of the most painful deaths that a person can experience. There will be humiliation and insults thrown at you, and the people coming to arrest you are coming soon. How will you feel? The Bible describes how an innocent man came to die for others. Jesus turns from addressing his disciples to praying to the Father. And he came out and went, as was his habit, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he arrived at the place called Gethsemane, he said to them, "Pray continually, that you may not fall into temptation." And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup of divine wrath from me. Yet not my will, but always yours be done." The Garden of Gethsemane was located on the Mount of Olives' western slope. Jesus frequently went there to pray, and the disciples, including the betrayer, were well aware of this. When they arrived, he warned them to pray so that they would not succumb to temptation. Perhaps the temptation he had in mind was the pressure to abandon God and his Christ as the enemies closed in. His openness in prayer demonstrates the depth and quality of his relationship with the Father. This is an important moment because he turns to God just before his arrest. In the prayer, we see both Jesus' anguish and his desire to do God's will, even if it means losing his life. Before he prays, he instructs them to pray in order to avoid temptation. Prayer is crucial since it brings us into fellowship with God and allows us to draw on his presence with us. In this context, Jesus' command to pray, written in a Greek present imperative, may suggest an ongoing commitment to pray as opposed to a single moment of prayer. Temptation is detoured only by persistent reliance on God. The text says he pulled away from his disciples, which adds a touch of emotion to the story. He kneels and intercedes, asking if there is another way to accomplish what is ahead. The request is couched in Jesus' fundamental commitment to doing God's will. "Father, if you are willing." At this point, the thought in Greek is shortened, indicating intense emotion. "Take this cup from me," Jesus pleads. Jesus has bracketed his request on each end with a commitment to do God's will. Luke chapter 22, verses 43 to 45. Now an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, deeply distressed and anguished, almost to the point of death, he prayed more intently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling down on the ground. When he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping from sorrow. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not fall into temptation." Jesus prays more fervently and sweats drops of blood. The intensity of the emotion grows. The text uses the Greek term agonia to describe Jesus' intense anguish. As he faces rejection and death, Jesus lays his burdens before God. This is a very human portrait of Jesus, as he faces his death with a range of emotions. Luke's portrait of Jesus does not conceal his divinity. He portrays Jesus as someone who can relate to our flaws and traumas. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15. "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize and understand our weaknesses and temptations, but one who has been tempted, knowing exactly how it feels to be human, in every respect as we are, yet without committing any sin." Jesus inquires why they are sleeping at this critical juncture, and again urges them to pray that they will not succumb to temptation. They will only be ready for what is ahead if they prepare for it as He has. Faithfulness is grounded in being in touch with God. This text reveals something about Jesus' character, while demonstrating how we can face the great trials of life that God sends us. These verses show a man who is reliant on God and determined to do His will. We see a person who faces adversity by turning to God, and another who expresses his intense emotions to God in prayer. On the other hand, the disciples have only their exhaustion and emotional pain. Despite Jesus' exhortation to pray, all they can do is sleep. Everything about Jesus' approach exemplifies how to deal with the stress of adversity. Jesus is not spared the trial, but what is supplied is the strength to face it. Though He does not hesitate to ask if another way can be found, He affirms His determination to follow God's will. Heaven responds by giving Jesus the strength to face what God has called Him to do, not by granting His request for another way. The passage revolves around the union of submission to the divine call and divine strength supplied. This passage reveals exemplary points about Jesus' character as He faces the cross trial. In prayer, Jesus expresses both His pain and His need to God. His custom of communing with God is unaffected by the unusual events that occur in His life. We frequently neglect to go to God with our needs when we are the busiest. Trials frequently bring us to our knees, but the hectic pace of life frequently keeps us on the move and prevents us from praying. That is not true of Jesus. His pattern reminds us that prayer is essential, even in the midst of chaos. And His prayer is not just a check-in. It is full of honesty, emotion, and pain. True prayer necessitates effort. Too often, rather than laboring in prayer, we bow our heads, close our eyes, and let our minds wander. In prayer, Jesus demonstrates honesty and humility. Why is He overcome right now? Jonathan Edwards captures it well. Christ was going to be cast into a dreadful furnace of wrath, and it was not proper that He should plunge Himself into it blindfold, as not knowing how dreadful the furnace was. Therefore, that He might not do so, God first brought Him and set Him at the mouth of the furnace, that He might look in and stand in view its fierce and raging flames, and might see where He was going, and might voluntarily enter into it and bear it for sinners, as knowing what it was. This view Christ had in His agony. Then God brought the cup that He was to drink and set it down before Him, that He might have a full view of it and see what it was before He took it and drank it. He is viewing the sin of all humanity. Again, words are going to escape us. His pain was not simple, but rather complex. We could only begin to comprehend His agony by remembering that He had to bear the penalty that sin deserved for millions upon millions of people. In the garden, Jesus' humanity is fully revealed.